Excuse me, my name is Healy. I'm the wife of the former Untitled. And our family now owns the store. And we're very happy to own it. We're very proud of it. And I just want to welcome all of you here. It's a wonderful evening. It's a very special evening with our two African poets. And I know that Ifeanyi would have been delighted knowing that there's people here from Zimbabwe that are going to read tonight. And I just want to introduce somebody who's very special in the back here. Uchenna. He's come from South Africa to be the director of the Imangiri Institute, which my husband also had a vision for in Worcester. And he just arrived a few days ago, but he has a big job ahead of him there, and it might be something you all, some of you might even be interested in the work that's going to be done there. So, welcome, and I know you will enjoy a wonderful evening. Thank you for
Hello, I just want to echo once again, thanks to everyone for coming out tonight. We are here to hear from two phenomenal poets. It's truly a special night. First up, Tsitsi Jaji will be opening for us tonight. Her most recent volume of poetry, Mother Tongues, received the Canem Northwestern University Press Prize. Her first collection, Feeding the Graves, and her chapbook, Carnaval, were both published by the African Poetry Book Fund. Jaji was born and raised in Zimbabwe and moved to the U.S. to study classical piano as well as literature. Her poems often evoke music, the sacred, migrancy, and ecological crisis. Her poems have also appeared in Harvard Review, the Academy of American Poets Poem a Day series, Black Renaissance Noir, Almost Island, Prairie Schooner, Bitter Oleander, and the list goes on. In addition, she's read at the Poetry Foundation, Library of Congress, and the United Nations, among other places. A former fellow at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Studies, Jaji earns her living as an associate professor at Opus University and is the author of Africa in Stereo, Music, Modernism, and Pan-African Solidarity. A special thank you extended to her for flying in from North Carolina to be here with us tonight. It's pretty amazing. Oh.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. It's really very moving to be in a space like this and with someone who is dear for many reasons, not least of which because he's the father of my daughter, by which I mean that his partner is an incredibly dear friend and sister, and in Zimbabwe she would be considered my daughter, which is quite a gift. So I'm going to really lean into the fact that I was a classical pianist for a while, and dear friends from Oberlin are here. And so the poems today are kind of clustered around music. In case my son is watching, hi Tembo. This is on Zoom, right? Lingua tongue-tied, clamped muscle, shell shutter, hold fast to mum's word, safe boxed secret perch, mothering a pearl. Seep salt, water's spell of pucker potion, brewed from crystals, land locked. Who knows what swimmer's ear called you here? Spasms clutch, tight-lipped as razors down below. Loosen when you will, and admit that one tongue that savors your delectable might. Blue Note for Guy Ramsey, Maestro. Lord, make me an instrument. I am no fool. Hard hands made tools of us. If I had a hammer. If there's a balm to make us whole, make it night time, the right time to turn spiritual. Lord, all the balm I have is me. What song I make is me. Lord, make me like you. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. What's mine is patched and crooked. Cowpea rose, chicken feet, hog guts. I'll make this song bend over me. I'll make it wipe my brow tenderly. Symphony board dinner with piano soloist for Vladimir Feltzman, Maestro. After the octaves of Beethoven, Opus 58, muscle memory remembers nothing feels better than bone in hand, fat trickling down the chin. The trick is to catch the fur-lined ladies at table, grab the meat from under their snub noses, taste it before it is forked or knifed, and suck out the marrow of tradition. We come to steal back what Mr. T.S. Eliot stole. We come red, feathered, and tarred. We will have seconds. Fistfuls please us more than niggardly dainties. And the 5 bagatelles after Beethoven was written for Malcolm Bilson, who Sylvia and I shared as an instructor of forte piano. He's very old type of piano, not really long. Opus 27, number 2, the Moonlight Sonata. I suppose since I'm leaving, my son is supposed to be anyway, since I'm reading and not you reading, I could tell you just a tiny bit about this. So Malcolm used to have people over for a master class once a week or month or something, and we would all sit there and listen to each person, and we would hear him talk about the thing, and then afterwards we'd have nice things to eat. 5 bagatelles after Beethoven for Malcolm Bilson. Opus 27, number 2, the Moonlight Sonata. In its fullness, a Hungarian touch sent the forte piano's wooden teeth clattering to the floor. Opus 2, number 3. Once the golden boy fell through a chair. It looked like magic. The trick, his corduroys cloaked a peg leg that suddenly came unhinged. Wads of apologies tumbled across the master class. A rush of mutterings about glue, round pins, and the squared wicker. By the time we were eating dainties and pointing out slurs in the score, he was all dusted off, propped up, and smug as a bug again. Opus 101. I wonder if the orchids are there for good form or for Empfindungskeit. 2 stacks of pink, 1 lily-gloved, 1 puckered line. As counterpoint, a cyclamen soaks up claret, as from a decanter. Opus 53, the Waldstein. There are only 2 ways to choose your favorite note. Always prefer the highest. And if not, simply admit you're wrong, emphatically. Opus 111, the pulse The dainties, the ortex, and the rotting keys add up to that one difference, the high or the low. Each week, the maestro sighs at accents, sloth, and clipped quavers. But first, he arches a mustachioed brow and shrugs. It's very good, you know. His mornings are spent campaigning to mute dinner music in restaurants, so we can finally eat like the deaf in peace. O dona nobis pacem. Fingerings. After Robert Schumann dies down, there's another one. Schumann knew highs and lows. He had bipolar disorder as far as one can decipher in today's languages. So the other poem, which I won't read, is called Flare, and it's after Robert Schumann's long gone. But for now, he dies down. Fingerings. Feeling the way back to a face I can face. Mind racked for words. Shame is what I know best. Only its name escapes me. Robert, my own slow man. I think you called this freezing point Eusebius. Or is it a name I call myself? A yes. See. Ache. After sitting my own 9-night. I remember every episode and that wonder, sharp miracle of March, each time the season out of reach is finally out of reach. That is the octave I am reaching for when I play Mass. So I teach at Duke, and last year I was able to co-teach a class with a composer, and our students were composers, literary students, and creative writer, and musicologists. It was the most fun that I've ever had. Like, we had never, any of us, had the ideas that we had by the time we left. And the students who are composers wrote songs that set the students who were literary people's words, poems, to music. And then we had a concert, and Louise Talbot, an incredible soprano, came and sang this stuff. And my co-instructor, Stephen Jaffe, surprised me the week of the concert and told me that he had said, oh dear. One of my poems to music too. It was amazing. So anyways, this is the poem devoid of music. Sorry. Ritual object, after Willie Cole. Through the artist's eyes, we catch this breath of fire, lifting water up to flight. This dead weight sinks our histories back into deep sleep, hidden away to dream of repair. Waking, we clutch at the real weight of a movable flood, catching streams that pour through metal, still cold to the touch. Time takes little care over us. Current flowing, its song sighs across weft, warp, wrinkle, fold. It collars us in its minutiae. Iron, pierced for steam's escape, ease across what was once shift, Now skirt, scarf, shirt sleeve, sheet, warm but will soon cool, stiffen but will turn soft, smooth our way and drape us in the dignity of this new day. I hope this goes okay. This one's called Prelude to a Kiss. The whole point of it was to kind of dwell in language and phonemes and that sort of thing. So one always hopes one doesn't frown. I don't read this or sound it out at all. Prelude to a Kiss. Under the water's skin, the mouth is a handkerchief, sponging wet salts that wake wonder. Is this spilling eye despair, or just an answer to smoke, old age, a stray grain of sand? Anemone, anemone. The mouth is a fist full of fingers, soft teeth drift in the deep. A sea rose, licked pink, turns purple in the limpid cobalt blue. Below the meniscus, things float. Fingers, hands, cheekbones. No bush, no pool, no current, only water, brushing a herd of medusas, thick things, soft things, smooth by water. Smoother still, petals spread in wet, unmetered breath. Anemone, anemone. Feeding on each other's names, the mouth drowns, aleatoric, in the eye. The last one on the Isle of Lesbos it came because I'd read a story about in the New York Times about this holiday island, Lesbos, at the time when the Syrian refugee waves were first as they have been. And at that time, the people on this island were able to leave. It's not so much on that particular place that on the Isle of Lesbos. for the ones who welcomed refugees on the Aegean shores. Months later, the islands, oh sorry, okay, I should wrap up. On the Isle of Lesbos, for the ones who welcomed refugees on the Aegean shores. Months later, the island's sheep shuffle uneasy with silence. Last year, 100,000 voices begged to be buried here, not another. They retched as if heaving could save them, but only thick seas of salt spilled onto the holiday sand. Now an island man clenches his jaw. The earth holds his only daughter still. One Christmas, spasms seized her. The next, her brother shook his way to lay down beside her body below. Then this fishing man learned what grave diggers already know by doing. Only the boat's lip remained, trembling on a crest of sympathy. He moored himself in his nets, a morning haul of squid-mined hope. Then the tide turned. His arms, flooded full of other men's children, come to rescue him from an unfathomed ocean of grief. Mothers were caught off guard. They shepherded this off-season crowd to the guest houses, fed them ewe's milk, took care to pay their stumps no mind. These Sibyls already knew from Turk, from Greek, how opposites can hurl their waves of rage at no man's land and turn men and women to ruins. If they had it to do over again, they would and could, now that their villages have cleared, now that the boy's photograph has won its Pulitzer and slipped our minds. They feel washed out. They feel their memories ebb. Their faint, faded, Sapphic rags must have been drowned out by Madeira's sirens and Ibiza's disco scene. Once a day, a woman sights a tiny ghost toddling across the water. All that these islanders have earned is anxious rest. Not even saints, stranded at home, can live without bread to kiss and milk to rinse it from their lips.
Thank you so much. That was really beautiful and powerful. And continuing on, it's especially my pleasure to introduce our next reader, as he is also a friend of mine and fellow cohort member across the river at BU. Togara Muzanenhamo was born to Zimbabwean parents in Lusaka, Zambia. He was brought up in Zimbabwe and then went on to study in The Hague and Paris. His poems are energized across time and capture movement in a way that is both unique and poignant. His insight to the geography both of the world and of people brings readers into the fold of an impressive linguistic landscape. He became a journalist in Harare, and his poems have appeared in magazines across Europe, South Africa, the United States, and in Zimbabwe. He has published 3 collections of poetry, Spirit Brides, Gumiguru, and most recently, Virga, a poetry book society recommendation for 2021. Virgo was also selected as one of the best poetry collections of 2021 by the Irish Times. Togara Muzanenhamo has been shortlisted for the Jerwood Alderberg First Collection Prize and the Glenna Prize for African Poetry. And with that, Togara.
I'm going to try and get my volume up because normally I'm a very soft speaker. Thank you for that kind introduction. I would also like to thank the Benketi family and James and the team at Grolier for organizing this reading. I'd also like to thank the audience for coming out tonight to share this evening of poetry from New York City. The first poem I'm going to read is from my second book. And Guru is a book about Zimbabwean, rural Zimbabwean life. And what I'd done with the book was that I condensed a decade of Zimbabwean life into one collection. So the first poem is called In the Music of Labor. The music of labor. At first the stubborn growth resists him, till each stroke is fluently flung to clear the knee-high grass, his task down to an art, the pendulous swing of knees slightly giving, his right arm catching the sun wet off the blade. All day the work, shuffling steps into shuffled clearings, beetles, crickets, rising off cordite clicks, sparking off stone, bearded chin sequined with sweat. The heat seems not to bother him, but steals his concentration deep in the trials of his faith. Why the sun rises and falls, why his jaundiced wife believes God will save them all, is just as unclear as why his newborn's unfinished death hangs heavy on every dawn. In the music of his labor, each composed thresh throws slashed grass to sunlight. Each mastered stroke floats timed beneath the weight of the sun burning deep in his heart. The mastered art of his fluent arm, with the song the hours constantly sing. I'm going to go to my latest collection, Virga, and in 1986, well, first I must give a premise on the book. The book is based about events that take place through the 20th century, and they're snapshots of various small events. And in 1986, in Northwestern Cameroon, a lake on a very high plateau erupted, and it released 300,000 tons of carbon dioxide. Now, the carbon dioxide was heavier than the air, obviously, and it rolled down the mountain. And there were villages on the actual mountain, and it wiped out several villages and killed around about 1,700 people. Now, this was a mystery to everybody because no one knew how these people died. People walked through the villages and there were just bodies lying everywhere. And it took the government and several international scientists to find out exactly what had happened, because they had no clue that the lake was an actual volcano. I think roughly around about a dozen people survived, and these villages, no one returned to them because they thought there was a curse. So It's a fairly lengthy poem, so I'm only going to read a short section. Well, it's not exactly short, but it's a section where a mother is returning back to the village, because they did go back to the villages after many years. And she's returning back to the village with her daughter. And this is part 3 of the section called Returning. First things first, I am neither shadow nor words. Only flesh could fill these bundled folds of grief. These torn, faded clothes you once loved, that make me question what I must look like. Your daughter says I slip into the night and sing your name when I'm asleep. That's bullshit. She doesn't know me and has never met you. And all I know is grief from these hills painted red with absences I could never have expected. Now every thought fails the old practices of this deserted place, this house and these rituals of loss, sweet in the ache of time, falling sweet off the rote of each breath. The years have aged me, hoary, brittle-boned. Walking up from the valley, dawn rose and dew bells dripped off blades of grass. The grass sharp at my shins, at my skin, cutting our shins, my scarred shins bleeding less than my daughter's. And I return because I am lost, return for the shadowed sunrise, the shadowed dusk. And walking, I am afraid and remember your fingers slipping neatly into mine. The red broken road burning with the sun behind us, burning with youthful promise. Who we were then was the mystery to unfold and draw us back into a dream only I would wake from. Silence ringing heavy and loud. Soft pulses of sunlight drip through rotting thatch. Ant mounds, pregnant with life, stand pressed into the walls. And I am here and alone and exhausted by chance, alone with a daughter who dreams of you but will never know who you are. We stand by the door and I set my knee to the ground, my eyes lost in the empty hearth. I'm going to read a poem from my first book. I was having a bit of a laugh with myself because I realized that the actual title of the book is quite dated, and the poem was written even before the euro became a currency. So the poem is called 6 francs 75. Each night we bought red wine from a small supermarket not too far from the Seine, where an overweight deaf teller smiled whenever we walked in. At the counter, he read our lips as we bought the cheapest wine we could find. Never any change, as each time we paid the exact amount in coins you counted, one by one, into his open palm. 6 francs 75. Late in the evening, you'd count up another 6.75, and we'd walk through the narrow streets back to the supermarket, fumbling through rich Parisians on their way to dinner. And you, who loved the city for our anonymity, became fond of the young teller, who seemed alone and estranged, and liked us too for the change we brought to his long nights when he read our hearts and lips. Remember when we figured out what he asked behind his mute lips? Why come twice? Why not save yourselves the walk and buy 4 or 5 bottles in the early evening? laughed, as nothing would change the way we bought or the walks we took hand in hand to the supermarket. The following evening, as we paid, we looked into the eyes of the deaf teller and said, "It's our habit," and left it at that. And he smiled, more so at you. From that night on, every night, this game with him and you. He'd lift his finger and wait for the silent words to form from our lips. And we'd say, "It's our habit," and he'd laugh, the deaf teller, as we played our game, and all we needed was 6 francs 75 on those evenings near the banks of the Seine, and that small supermarket, always paying the exact amount, never receiving any change. Then you left and went away, and so heartfelt was the change that each night I cried, and it's safe to say that he too sorely missed you. In the evenings, I still walked the narrow streets to the supermarket, remembering our walks in expensive coats, the jokes and your pale lips, the way you kept the coins in a velvet pouch, the 6.75 that you'd always count into the soft open palm of the deaf teller. The night before I went away, I looked into the eyes of the deaf teller and told him I was leaving the next day. His round face changed. Something sad swelled in his eyes as I placed the 6.75 into his palm. He then signed to the sky, asking if I was on my way to you. But no words this time. I could say nothing. No words of you from my lips. I packed the bottles of wine and slowly began to exit the supermarket. The deaf teller ran to me, tapped me on the shoulder as I thought of you. With no change to his eyes, he shook my hand and silently said with his lips, "It's your habit, and exactly 6 francs 75. I smiled and left the supermarket. I've written a series of poems about chess, and the poems are all about openings, the openings of chess. And the poem I'm going to read now is about the 1921 chess championship, which was played by between Jose Capablanca and Emmanuel Lasca. And the two were supposed to play some years before, but they were unable to because something came up for some reason or another. There was a visa issue also involved in all of this for Lasca to play. So in the end, Lasca wanted to resign his championship, and he said, "Look, I think Capablanca is the better player. He should take the championship." But then Capablanca said, "No, that's not the way it works. I want to play you and win the title fairly." So on the first match, Emmanuel Lasca opens with the Queen's Gambit, and there's an epigraph to the poem. Queen's Gambit. One usually makes blunders for good reasons. For instance, because of overexertion, diverted attention, or some other hidden failing in one's mental makeup. On this occasion, the Cuban sun was to blame. It had intoxicated me. Emmanuel Lasca, 4th of April, 1921, Havana. "42 years had passed since chess matches and card games for small stakes at Café Kaiserhof. He'd left Newmark for Berlin, gained prominence in St. Petersburg, Montreal, Paris, London, emigrated to New York, and was now leaving Amsterdam with Martha aboard aboard the Hollandia. The journey, 3 weeks from the Veldgrauw waters of the Dutch port, the North Seas at Pierik Hold, opening out to the vast Atlantic, where shapes of sky and water loosened to join trade routes washed bright with cyanic light. Plough winds swept over the Strait of Florida, but the Gulf of Mexico stirred and gave nothing more. The Hollandia entering a bay once known for the sound of fortress bells and cannon fire. The Caribbean Sea cresting the esplanade and sea wall of the Malecon. The Grand Master had arrived, and though the city of columns welcomed him, its citizens still reserved every prayer for the Spanish officer's son. The match was on, each man to face the other as both challenger and champion. When they met, the air was humid, the Union Club packed. No one said a word. Only the audience's breath caught the ear. Sugar barons in white linen suits perfumed front row seats with clouds of blue expensive Corojo smoke. Every eye trained on the clock beside the board on the wall. The clock waiting to give and divide time and turn thought into movements and ideas and images that would run wild over calm, mesmerized scenes multiplied like grains of rice. For years, the world had waited on these two men to meet. And when the German eventually lifted his hand, the audience drew their breath as they watched him hesitated, intoxicated by the Cuban sun. Just seeing if we have enough time. Do we have enough time?
We do, yeah.
So I'll read two more poems. Every year at my school, we would publish a yearbook, and the yearbook was called the Chronicles. And some time back, I was driving by the school, and I have certain memories about the school. And I decided to drive into the school and visit the library and have a look at these yearbooks. So this poem is called The Chronicles. They still drew the old roller over the cricket pitches, with men yoked like a team of oxen to the stubborn iron wheel. The grass smelt as the grass did, all rich beneath the afternoon sun, the heat flashing off the ground like a blinding flick of steel. All the fields were there, much smaller than remembered, the rugby and football grounds unused, the powdered lime lines washed out by the rains, but the names of dead Jesuits on signs still stood on the creed edges in traditional white and red. Up into view, the memorable tower of stone rose with all the dreams of climbing up the winding cool stairwell, up to the top of the turret, where thoughts of fields soft with warm breaths of red top met the sky with hope and refuge. But those were just the schoolboy's dreams, brought on by the sight of the huge bronze plaque of St. George plunging his spear, extinguishing our fears of the dragon. Though all that bullshit vanished with age, the hero on the forged plaque still remains some old myth the Jesuits like to work on. I'm here to go through the Chronicles, 86 to the mid-90s. The receptionist is grey and half-deaf. I'm apparently soft-spoken, so there's a lot of repetition accompanied by grimaces and apologies. I'm here to go through the Chronicles. Yes to another question. I did attend here some years back. Yes, an old Georgian, an old boy. The phone slowly goes up to her ear as she mentions something about visits and strange requests from foreign journalists wanting to sit in on classes or have private interviews with the boys. Penny? Yes, Penny. It's me. I seem to have a safe one here. Wants to go through the Chronicles. Something about poetry. Her small eyes look up. You do remember the way back to the library. I had forgotten, but then retraced the steps in my mind to get there. Each class I pass, a voice spills from the mock Edwardian windows. The red polished floors tap under my feet, and a sweet blessedness fills me that I'm not sitting in those sweat rooms of learning, shadows of my youth, daydreaming about a new world after the first kiss. The study hall has lost all its desks and holds an array of instruments and chairs for classical musicians. The fountain in the quad is gone now, and at first it didn't mean a thing to me, but then a crude bewilderment took hold when a memory tried to find its place in the absence. And how on earth they removed it had me lost. The lawn was perfectly smooth. The weights room, where our hands were beaten blue by a leather wad, where iron was pumped on hot afternoons, was now clean and had the smell of sweat and leather replaced by veneered computer booths. Outside an office, a boy lifted his hat and said good morning in a way that had me question what he'd said. It was only when I looked back that I noticed the strain on his face, his rheumy eyes, and the big black words scoured across his chest, faggot. I could see how easily they could have pinned him down. The tree was there where we sat at break, trying to forget the color bar that still hasn't faded outside the gates. The smell of mosasa leaves and old orange peels revived a dead ache that filled my belly. A mob outside the science lab, fists of other kids. When I met Penny, she smiled, and something told me it wasn't a strange request to come here and go through the Chronicles. She had them stacked up on her desk, all piled up chronologically, towers of memories, names and dates in black and white at my disposal. I sat down, leafed through the pages, the photographs alive in my head, and after an hour of being immersed in the vivid quiet, the bell rang, and it was still that same high-pitched drill that once brought relief as it sang through the long corridors, but also brought with it a certain dread. And I'll conclude with a poem which is named after the wind, Alize. And the 28-year-old woman referred to within the epigraph of the poem is Audrey Maestre. Among circles, there is belief that there was foul play in how she died. So there's two epigraphs before the poem. May my enemy be assuaged by these waves, because they are beautiful even to his evil. May the drizzle be a benediction to his heart. Derek Walcott. Freediving, plunging to the greatest possible depth on a single breath without scuba gear, is one of the more extreme contemporary diversions, And last week it cost the 28-year-old French woman her life as a world record attempt off the coast of the Dominican Republic went tragically awry. New York Times, 12 October 2002. From the depths, there is no sound of rain meeting the ocean's surface. Only the grand motion of the deep hoists his wife in grey columns of sea. An arm in the half-light will only take the body halfway. A diving sled abandoned on a steel line where water flows slower than the wind's history. When the clock counts down, the seconds exceed a time, forcing him to dive and fill his palms with propulsion, corkscrewing and clawing for the ocean's bed. The weight of water darkening his blood, compressing cavities and plates of the skull. And where pressure condenses air, he snatches his wife from another man's arms and, cradling her body, kicks and races for the sky.
Thank you both for the beautiful reading, and Kiara, thank you for the introductions. We have time for a couple of questions, if the poets will entertain them.
We will try to entertain you.
I want to step back up here for the Zoomers.
Are these chairs would you like us to sit, or is
If you'd like to, sure.
yeah?
I have a question. For the younger poets in the room, what was it like getting your first manuscript published? Can you talk a little bit about that process?
I think you should go first, so I can see if you can do it. I think so. When is third?
2006, I believe. Mine was a difficult process. I started writing poetry, and whilst I was a journalist, and I'd collected quite a few poems which looked like a rough manuscript. I then sent the manuscript to several publishers in Zimbabwe, and they all turned it down. So the next thing which I had to do was to try the next country, which was South Africa, and it happened again. They all turned down the manuscript. So I thought, well, why not go to the source of the language itself? And I submitted the manuscript to several publishers within the United Kingdom, and I got a quick response from my publisher, who I've been with now for I think it's over 20 years. And they said they were interested in the work, and but they said the work was still not polished. So they said they would work with me, and it took 7 years for that manuscript to be worked into what turned out to be, and don't forget your own name of the book. I don't know what's your process.
Well, so my first like full-length collection, Beating the Graves, came out in 2017. I had a chapbook that came out in 2014. And a year or two before that, Kwame Dawes and Chris Abani and Kabiba Badaroon and Arsalas Gilman, a group of really amazing and very generous writers and foundation layers and just institutions unto themselves decided that it's very hard to publish African poetry anywhere. I mean, like, there's Chimamanda market and, you know, like even a theater market, etc. But nobody's coming around saying, gosh, if only we had some African poets, you know. And if they are, they're in South Africa buying South African books or Nigeria, whatever. So they started African Poetry Book Fund. And there was a whole conversation to be held about, you know, University of Nebraska being at the center of African poetry, which it is in a provincial sort of sense. Every place that you live is the center of its poetry. But they had this competition called the Ron, I think it's Ron, no, I think it's not, the Silliman Prize. Not Silliman the poet, the other Silliman. And it was the first book poetry prize. First book poetry prize for African poetry I had heard of, and so of course, since I'd sent it to many other places, not that full manuscript, well yeah, I'd sent a manuscript to many places and didn't get a letter saying we're not interested, I just didn't get a reply. So I sent it off, you know, thinking, oh, this is a much smaller pool. And as I have discovered in life, it's very good to come in second. Very good. It's almost as good as coming in first. I didn't get the first book prize. Never have, never will. It's too late at this point, right? But they took some of the poems and said they would publish them as a chapbook in the first of what has become a series of box sets of chapbooks by African poets. And all of us generally knew as people who publish chapbooks often are. And that was very exciting and very memorable and a turning point because I started to use the word poet in reference to myself, you know. But it was very embarrassing. Oh, there it is. That's one of the poetry book sets. It's the most recent one, that lovely red box. And the book next to it, the Reinhardt frames, is one of them in there. I'm forgetting his name, the Zambian. But anyway, so the chapbook was sort of getting on the radar of Kwame Dawes, who is a godfather to many, many people of any variety or range of backgrounds. He's one of the founders of the Calabash Festival, and before that was very important to a generation that published in Britain and People Press. And then he was like, oh, we want to work with you, etc. We have a manuscript. That is, you know, like when you have a better manuscript. So I did it, and they took it. And they didn't really work with it. I sort of wish that they did, because, you know, I've never taken a poetry class. So it would, I mean, like writing poetry class. So it would have been good to get corrected. So there it is, Reading Phrase. And then that was the first collection. And it was very nice because every book from the African Poetry Fund has this little thing on it. And then you get seen to be an African poet with other African poets who you'd never be with if not for that. But having lived in the States, we're close to 30 years. I'm quite a lot older than I would like to say I am. It's not that often that I can still legitimately be seen as an African poet by other African poets and African readers and Zimbabwean readers, of which there are a few in this room. So anyways, long answer to a short question.
If there aren't any other questions, I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight, and let's give another thank you to the poets. books are for sale. The poets will be signing books over here. Everyone could please take your chairs and move them up against the door.
I'll
Thank you
just
so
say
much.
this book is on Amazon. This book is alright, but I tried to get there.
No, not at all. Yeah, that was right. Yeah, both times that was great.
Oh my gosh, I'm sweating.
What a zoo. You're standing almost to the
One of the crowded events with the open Manuscript.
Yeah, I would say so. I wasn't totally expecting that, but
A lot of people have been reading.
yeah, that was also pretty fun. Oh my gosh.
And got really rude by that. I can't believe you're here.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, I did. I'm gonna sit down. Alright, how do we get out of here? Should we stop this or just leave it going?